William Desmond Taylor, born William Cunningham Dean Tenner, the 26th of April 1872, the 1st of February 1922, was an Anglo-Irish-American film director and actor. A popular figure in the growing Hollywood motion picture colony of the 1910s and early 1920s, Taylor directed 59 silent films between 1914 and 1922 and acted in 27 between 1913 and 1915. Taylor's murder on the 1st of February 1922, along with other Hollywood scandals such as the Roscoe Arbuckle trial, led to a frenzy of sensationalist and often fabricated newspaper reports. The murder remains an official cold case. Early life. William Cunningham Dean Tenner was born into the Anglo-Irish gentry on the 26th of April 1872, at Eventon House, County Carlow, Ireland, one of 5 children of a retired British Army officer, Major Carnes Dean Tenner of the Carlow Rifles, and his wife, Jane O'Brien. Taylor's siblings were Dennis Gage Dean Tenner, Ellen Nell Dean Tenner, Father Phillips, Lizzie Daisy Dean Tenner, and Oswald Carnes Dean Tenner. One of his uncles was Charles Carnes Dean Tenner, the Member of Parliament for Mid Cork. From 1885 to 1887 Taylor attended Marlborough College in England. In 1890, he left Ireland for a dude ranch in Kansas. There, Taylor became reacquainted with acting, his first experiences being at school, and eventually moved to New York City. While in New York, Taylor courted Ethel May Hamilton, an actress who had appeared in the stage musical Florodora under the name Ethel May Harrison. Hamilton's father was a broker and an investor in the English antique store on Fifth Avenue, the Antique Shop, which eventually employed Taylor. The couple married in an Episcopal ceremony on the 7th of December 1901 at the little church around the corner, and had a daughter, Ethel Daisy, in 1902 or 1903. Taylor and his family were well known in New York society and were members of several clubs. He was also a heavy drinker, possibly suffered from depression, and was known to carry on affairs with women. Taylor suddenly disappeared on the 23rd of October 1908, deserting his wife and daughter. After his disappearance, friends said he had previously suffered mental lapses, and his family thought initially he had wandered off during an episode of amnesia. Taylor's wife obtained a state decree of divorce in 1912. Little is known of the years immediately following Taylor's disappearance. He traveled through Canada, Alaska and the northwestern U.S., mining gold and working with various acting troupes. Eventually, he switched from acting to producing. By the time he arrived in San Francisco around 1912, he had changed his name to William Desmond Taylor. In San Francisco, some New York acquaintances met him, and provided him with some money to re-establish himself in Los Angeles. Hollywood. In Hollywood, Taylor worked as a film actor starting in 1913, including 4 appearances opposite Margaret "Gibby" Gibson. He directed his first film, The Awakening, in 1914, as an actor-director. Over the next few years, he directed more than 50 films. Between 1914 and 1919, Taylor was engaged to actress Neva Gerber, whom he had met during the filming of The Awakening. Gerber later recalled, "He was the soul of honor, a man of personal culture, education, and refinement. I have never known a finer or better man." Around 1915, Taylor made contact with his sister-in-law, Ada Brennan Dean Tenner, wife of Taylor's younger brother Dennis, a former British Army lieutenant and manager of New York antiques business, separate from Hamilton's. Dennis had also abandoned his wife and children, disappearing in 1912. Ada and her daughters moved to Monrovia, California, where Ada could be treated at the Pottinger Sanatorium for tuberculosis. Ada's sister, Lillian Pomeroy, was married to the sanatorium's physician in charge, Dr. John L. Pomeroy. This would become public after Taylor's murder, and the press descended upon the little town of Monrovia. Towards the end of World War I, in July 1918, Taylor enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force as a private. After training for 4.5 months at Fort Edward, Nova Scotia, Taylor sailed from Halifax on a troop transport carrying 500 Canadian soldiers. They arrived at Unsolved Barracks, London on the 2nd of December 1918. Taylor was ultimately assigned to the Royal Army Service Corps of the Expeditionary Forces Canteen Service, stationed at Dunkirk, and promoted to the temporary grade of lieutenant on the 15th of January 1919. At the end of April 1919, Taylor reached his final billet at Bergate, France, as Major Taylor, Company D, Royal Fusiliers. Upon returning to Los Angeles on the 14th of May 1919, Taylor was honored by the Motion Picture Directors Association with a formal banquet at the Los Angeles Athletic Club. After returning from military service, Taylor went on to direct some of the most popular stars of the era, including Mary Pickford, Wallace Reid, Dustin Farnham and his protégé, Mary Miles Minter, who starred in the 1919 version of Anne of Green Gables. By this time, Taylor's ex-wife and daughter were aware that he was working in Hollywood. In 1918, while watching the film Captain Alvarez, they saw Taylor appear on the screen. Ethel responded, "That's your father." In response, Ethel Daisy wrote Taylor in care of the studio. In 1921, Taylor visited his ex-wife and daughter in New York City and made Ethel Daisy his legal heir. Murder at 7:30 a.m. on the morning of Thursday, the 2nd of February 1922, Taylor's body was found inside his bungalow at the Alvarado Court Apartments, 404B South Alvarado Street, in Westlake, Los Angeles, a trendy and affluent neighborhood. A crowd gathered inside, and someone identifying himself as a doctor stepped forward, made a cursory examination of the body, and declared Taylor had died of a stomach hemorrhage. The doctor was never seen again. When doubts later arose, the body was rolled over by forensic investigators, revealing that the 49-year-old film director had been shot at least once in the back with what appeared to have been a small-caliber pistol, which was not found at the scene. Taylor's funeral took place on the 7th of February 1922 in St. Paul's Pro Cathedral. After an Episcopal ceremony, Taylor was interred in a mausoleum at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, Hollywood Cemetery on Santa Monica Boulevard, in Hollywood. The inscription on his crypt reads, "In memory of William C. Dean Tanner, beloved father of Ethel Dean Tanner. Died the 1st of February 1922. Investigation in Taylor's pockets. Investigators found a wallet holding $78 in cash, adjusted for inflation in 2020 would be approx. $1,190, a silver cigarette case, a Waltham pocket watch, a pen knife, and a locket bearing a photograph of actress Mabel Normand. A 2-carat diamond ring was on his finger. With the evidence of the money and valuables on Taylor's body, robbery seemingly was not the motive for the killing. However, a large but undetermined sum of cash that Taylor had shown to his accountant the day before was missing and apparently never accounted for. After some investigation, the time of Taylor's death was set at 7:50 p.m. on the evening of the 1st of February, 1922. While being interviewed by the police 5 days after the director's body was found, Mary Miles Minter said that following the murder, a friend, director and actor Marshall Nealon, had told her that Taylor had made several highly delusional statements about some of his social acquaintances, including her, during the weeks before his death. She also said that Nealon thought Taylor had recently become insane. In the midst of a media circus caused by the case, Los Angeles Under Sheriff Eugene Biscayne has warned Chicago Tribune reporter Eddie Doherty, "The industry has been hurt. Stars have been ruined. Stockholders have lost millions of dollars. A lot of people are out of jobs and incensed enough to take a shot at you." According to Robert Giroux, the studios seemed to be fearful that if certain aspects of the case were exposed, it would exacerbate their problems. King Vidor said of the case in 1968, "Last year I interviewed a Los Angeles police detective, William Michael Cahill, Sr., now retired, who had been assigned to the case immediately after the murder. He told me, "We were doing all right, and then, before a week was out, we got the word to lay off." Suspects and witnesses. More than a dozen individuals were eventually named as suspects by both the press and the police. Newspaper reports at the time were both overwhelmingly sensationalized and speculative, even fabricated, and the murder was used as the basis for much subsequent, true crime fiction. Many inaccuracies were carried forward by later writers who used articles from the popular press as their sources. Overall, most accounts have consistently focused on 7 people as suspects and witnesses. Edward Sands. Edward F. Sands had prior convictions for embezzlement, forgery, and serial desertion from the U.S. military. Born in Ohio, he had multiple aliases and spoke with an affected Cockney accent. He had worked as Taylor's valet and cook until 7 months before the murder. While Taylor was in Europe the summer before in 1921, Sands had forged Taylor's name on checks and wrecked his car. Later, Sands burgled Taylor's bungalow, leaving footprints on the film director's bed. Following the murder, Sands was never seen or heard from again. Henry P.V. Henry P.V., who replaced Sands as valet, was the person who found Taylor's body. Newspapers noted that P.V. wore flashy golf costumes, but did not own any golf clubs. 3 days before Taylor's murder, P.V. had been arrested for social vagrancy and charged with being lewd and dissolute. According to Robert Giroux, even though the police decided, after severe questioning, that P.V. was not the murderer, the Hollywood correspondent of the New York Daily News, Flora Belle Muir, came to a private conclusion that P.V. was the murderer. In that era of ingenious women reporters, Muir thought she could engineer a scoop by tricking P.V. into a confession. She knew, from the movies, that blacks were deathly afraid of ghosts. With the help of 2 Confederates, Frank Carson and Al Wainshank, she offered P.V. $10 if he would identify Taylor's grave in the Hollywood Park Cemetery, which she had already visited. Wainshank had gone on ahead with a white sheet, and Muir and Carson drove P.V. to the site. Wainshank, who came from a tough section of Chicago, spoke with the accents of a hoodlum. When he loomed up in the sheet and cried out, "I am the ghost of William Desmond Taylor. You murdered me. Confess, P.V." Henry laughed out loud. Then he cursed them roundly. Unfortunately for Muir, she was unaware that Taylor had a distinctive British accent. Wainshank, as Muir revealed in her memoirs, not only spoke like a hoodlum, but also was one of the Chicago mobsters who were later gunned down in the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre. In 1931, P.V. died in a San Francisco asylum where he had been hospitalized for syphilis-related dementia. Mabel Normand. Mabel Normand was a popular comedic actress and frequent co-star with Charlie Chaplin and Roscoe Arbuckle. According to author Robert Giroux, Taylor was deeply in love with Normand, who had originally approached him for help in curing her cocaine dependency. Based upon Normand's subsequent statements to police investigators, her repeated relapses were devastating for Taylor. According to Giroux, Taylor met with federal prosecutors shortly before his death and offered to assist them in filing charges against Normand's cocaine suppliers. Giroux expresses a belief that Normand's suppliers learned of this meeting and hired a contract killer to assassinate the director. According to Giroux, Normand suspected the reasons for her lover's murder, but did not know the identity of the triggerman. On the night of the murder, Normand claimed to have left Taylor's bungalow at 7:45 p.m. in a happy mood, carrying a book he had lent her. She and Taylor blew kisses to each other as her limousine drove her away. Normand was the last person known to have seen Taylor alive, and the Los Angeles Police Department subjected her to a grueling interrogation, but ruled her out as a suspect. Most subsequent writers have done the same. However, Normand's career had already slowed, and her reputation was tarnished by revelations of her addiction, which was seen as a moral failing. According to George Hopkins, who sat next to her at Taylor's funeral. Norman wept inconsolably throughout the ceremony. Ultimately, Norman continued to make films throughout the 1920s. She died of tuberculosis 8 years later on the 23rd of February 1930. According to her friend and confidant Julia Brew, Norman asked her a few days before she died, "Julia, do you think they'll ever find out who killed Bill Taylor?" Faith Cole MacLaine and her husband, actor Douglas MacLaine, were Taylor's neighbors, and Faith is widely believed to have seen Taylor's killer. The couple was startled by a loud noise at 8 p.m. MacLaine went to and opened her front door and she saw someone emerging from the front door of Taylor's home who she said was dressed like my idea of a motion picture burglar. She recalled this person paused for a moment before turning and walking back through the door, as if having forgotten something, then re-emerged seconds later and flashed a smile at her before running off and disappearing between the buildings. Mrs. MacLaine thought that the loud noise she had heard was a car backfire, not a gunshot. She also told police interviewers this person looked funny, like movie actors in white face makeup, and speculated that it may have been a woman disguised as a man due to the person's height and build. Charles Ayton was the general manager of Paramount Pictures. Several sources claimed that in the hours following Taylor's murder, Ayton entered Taylor's bungalow with a group of Paramount employees and removed compromising items, either before police arrived or with their permission. Mary Miles Minter. Mary Miles Minter was a former child star and teen screen idol, whose career had been guided by Taylor. Minter, who had grown up without a father, was only 3 years older than the daughter Taylor had abandoned in New York. Love letters from Minter were found in Taylor's bungalow. Based upon these, the reporters alleged that a sexual relationship between the 49-year-old Taylor and 19-year-old Minter had started when she was 17. Robert Giroux and King Vidor, however, disputed this allegation. Citing Minter's own statements, both believed that her love for Taylor was unrequited. Taylor had often declined to see Minter and had described himself as too old for her. However, facsimiles of Minter's passionate letters to Taylor were printed in newspapers, forever shattering her screen image as a modest and wholesome young girl. Minter was vilified in the press. She made 4 more films for Paramount, and when the studio failed to renew her contract, she received offers from many other producers. Never comfortable as an actress, Minter declined them all. In 1957, she married Brandon O. Hildebrandt, a Danish-American businessman. She died in Santa Monica, California, on the 4th of August 1984. Charlotte Shelby. Charlotte Shelby was Minter's mother. Like many stage mothers before and since, she has been described as manipulative and consumed by wanton greed over her daughter's career. Minter and her mother were bitterly divided by financial disputes and lawsuits for a time, but they later reconciled. Shelby's initial statements to police about the murder are still characterized as evasive and, obviously, filled with lies about both her daughter's relationship with Taylor and other matters. Perhaps the most compelling bit of circumstantial evidence was that Shelby allegedly owned a rare .38 caliber pistol and some unusual bullets which were very similar to the kind which had killed Taylor. After this information became public, she reportedly threw the pistol into a Louisiana bayou. Shelby knew the Los Angeles district attorney socially and spent years outside the United States in an effort to avoid both official inquiries by his successor and press coverage related to the murder. In 1938, her other daughter, actress Margaret Shelby, who was by then suffering from both clinical depression and alcoholism, openly accused her mother of the murder. Shelby was widely suspected of the crime and was a favored suspect of many writers. For example, Adele Rogers St. John speculated that Shelby was torn by feelings of maternal protection for her daughter and her own attraction to Taylor. Although, like Edward Sands, Shelby feared being tried for the murder, at least 2 Los Angeles County district attorneys publicly declined to prosecute her. Almost 20 years after the murder, Los Angeles District Attorney Buren Fitts concluded evidence was insufficient for an indictment of Shelby and recommended that the remaining evidence in case files be retained on a permanent basis. All of these materials subsequently disappeared. Shelby died in 1957. Fitts, in ill health, committed suicide in 1973. Margaret Gibson. Margaret Gibson was a film actress who had worked with Taylor when he first came to Hollywood. In 1917, she was indicted, tried, and acquitted on charges equivalent to prostitution, also with allegations of opium dealing, after which she changed her professional name to Patricia Palmer. In 1923, Gibson was arrested and jailed on extortion charges, which were later dropped. Gibson was 27 years old and in Los Angeles at the time of the murder. No record of her name was ever mentioned in connection with the investigation. Soon after the murder, she got work in a number of films produced by famous players Lasky, Taylor's studio at the time of his death. Shortly before she died in 1964, Gibson reportedly confessed to murdering Taylor. Tinseltown, WMJ Man. Lack of evidence. Through a combination of poor crime scene management and apparent corruption, much physical evidence was immediately lost and the rest vanished over the years, although copies of a few documents from the police files were made public in 2007. Various theories were put forward after the murder and in the years since, and many books were published claiming to have identified the murderer, but no hard evidence was ever uncovered to link the crime to a particular individual. Aftermath. A spate of newspaper-driven Hollywood scandals during the early 1920s included Taylor's murder, the Roscoe Arbuckle trial, the death of Olive Thomas, the mysterious death of Thomas H. Ince, and the drug-related deaths of Wallace Reid, Barbara Lamar, and Gene Eagles, all of which prompted Hollywood studios to begin writing contracts with morality clauses or moral turpitude clauses, allowing the dismissal of contractees who breached them. See also List of unsolved murders. In popular culture, the murder appears in F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1940s story, Pat Hobby's Christmas Wish. Hobby discovers a supposed confession to the murder from a Hollywood producer and tries to use it to blackmail him. The film Sunset Boulevard, 1950, with William Holden and Gloria Swanson, featured a fictional, aging silent screen actress named Norma Desmond, whose name was taken from Taylor's middle name and Mabel Norman's last name, as a way to resonate with the widely publicized scandals of almost 30 years before. The film Hollywood Story, 1951, an attempt by Universal Pictures to take advantage of the success of Sunset Boulevard, is clearly based directly on the Taylor murder. While the film reaches a fictional conclusion, it follows the circumstances of the real-life event closely. Gore Vidal's novel Hollywood, 1990, features a fictionalized account of the Taylor murder. Taylor's murder was depicted in David Merrick's production of the Jerry Herman, Michael Stewart cult musical Mac and Mabel, which opened on Broadway at the Majestic Theater on the 6th of October 1974. And ran for 6 previews and 66 regular performances. Directed and choreographed by Gower Champion, the production starred Robert Preston as Mac Sennett and Bernadette Peters as Mabel Normand, with James Mitchell portraying William Desmond Taylor. Old Hollywood. Silent Stars. Deadly Secret, an episode of the A&E true crime series City Confidential, aired in 2000 and is about the Taylor murder. In 2012, to mark the 140th anniversary of his birth, the William Desmond Taylor Society, in his hometown of Carlow, Ireland, established Taylorfest, an annual arts and film festival honoring Ireland's most prolific filmmaker and celebrating the contribution of the Irish to silent film. Tin Pot and Cleverality Productions produced, with funding from the Broadcast Authority of Ireland, a 1-hour drama documentary examining the murder of William Desmond Taylor presented in the style of a 1920s live radio show entitled Who Killed Bill? 2013. Written and directed by Mark Ivan O'Gorman, The show combined dramatizations with interviews from experts, including Oscar-winning film historian Kevin Brownlow. In 2018, BuzzFeed Unsolved produced a video discussing the scandalous murder of William Desmond Taylor. Career as director, Taylor directed more than 60 films. These include The Diamond from the Sky, 1915, The Heart of Paula, 1916, co-directed with friend Julia Crawford Ivers, Davy Crockett, 1916, Tom Sawyer, 1917, Mile a Minute Kendall, 1918, How Could You, Gene, 1918 with Mary Pickford, Anne of Green Gables, 1919 with Mary Miles Minter, Huckleberry Finn, 1920 Judy of Rogues Harbor, 1920 Jenny Be Good, 1920 The Furnace, 1920 Wealth, 1921 The Green Temptation, 1922, released posthumously The Top of New York, 1922, released posthumously. References. Further reading: Giroux, Robert, 1990. A Deed of Death. The Story Behind the Unsolved Murder of William Desmond Taylor. Knopf. ISBN 0-394-58075-3. Hyam, Charles, 2004. Murder in Hollywood. Solving a Silent Screen Mystery. University of Wisconsin Press. ISBN 0-299-20360-3. Kirkpatrick, Sidney D. 1992. A Cast of Killers. Onyx. Reprint edition. ISBN 0-451-17418-6. Long, Bruce, 1991. William Desmond Taylor. A Dossier. Scarecrow Press. ISBN 0-8108-2490-6. Druicksman, Michael B. 2014. Murder in Babylon. A novel based on fact. Bear Manor Media. ISBN 978-159-3937829. Sennett, Mac, 1954. King of Comedy. Doubleday. ISBN 0-916515-66-4. Brash, S. and J. Cave, ed. 1993. The Director. Unsolved Crimes, True Crime Series. Time Life Books. ISBN 0-7835-0012-2. Lagan, Dominic, 2009. Fallen Angels, A Blackwood McCabe Hollywood Mystery. Strategic Books. ISBN 978-1-60860-1967. Mann, William J. 2014. Tinseltown, Murder, Morphine, and Madness at the Dawn of Hollywood. HarperCollins. ISBN 978-006-224-2167. External links: Taylorology homepage, links to all issues of Taylorology, 4 through 98. William Desmond Taylor on IMDb. William Desmond Taylor at the TCM Movie Database. The Kiss on YouTube. 16 silent film celebrities and the William Desmond Taylor case on YouTube.